Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show best-selling author David Epstein, who writes about science and medicine, about sports, and he has written a fabulous book called The Sports Gene. David, tell me, do I have the sports gene?
I don't really know. I haven't had a chance to look at your genes and don't know about your athletic accomplishments. But if you're like most people, you probably do have some, if you can find the right environment in which to cultivate them.
Yeah, okay. How about for sort of like a middle-aged Jewish money manager? Does that sound like a guy with a sports gene?
You know, the thing that the revolution in exercise genetics is finding that you don't really know. The most important sports genes are those that prime you to benefit from a certain type of training. So before you found a particular type of training, you really don't know. And I know that was a tongue-in-cheek question, but that's really what some of the revolution in exercise genetics is finding. Trainability genes.
Trainability, does this apply only to sports, or does it apply to intellectual pursuits as well?
Well, I will say it appears to apply to motor skill acquisition, which is nothing more than kind of a changing of your brain, and to memory as well in some cases, that some people are more trainable. And one of the genes that's emerging in that study is called BDNF, or brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So, I stay with sort of within that realm, and I think that's where the research is more robust. But it's looking more and more like it affects many aspects of our training.
Okay, so it actually sounds to me like you may be disagreeing with a couple of guests that I've had here on the Goldstein on Gelt show. One of them who spoke about memory, is one of, I'd say, the world's greatest memory teachers, a fellow named Harry Lorraine, who insists that memory is something that you can train to improve. Is that true, or do you think some people are born with it?
Oh no, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But that's not differentiating from people having talents for it or training faster. Actually, you can improve basically everything. It's just a question of the learning rate. So chess masters used to be thought to have these miraculous memories, because if they were given a chessboard and it was taken away after 3 seconds, they could recreate the entire board. So they must just be gifted with great memory. But then when they were presented with boards that didn't have a meaningful game situation, they were no better than normal people. So it turned out it was just that they had learned to remember groupings of positions that were meaningful from their practice. So you absolutely can improve your memory by learning systems in an incredible amount, and yet people don't improve at the same rate.
It's funny you bring up chess. I'm actually working on a book now, which is going to be coming out in a couple of months. I wrote a book with world chess champion Susan Polgar from the Polgar sisters. She has been studied by many, many people because of her amazing chess skills. And one of the things that she and I talked about when we were writing the book was, when she plays blindfolded, what does she really see in her mind? And what was fascinating is that if I were playing chess blindfolded, I think I would try to remember where every piece was. And it's nothing like what she sees. She just sort of sees power on the board, or what to you and me might just look like, unless you do this as well, sorry, but to me would look like clouds of influence as opposed to individual pieces. And that is how she remembers things.
And it's quite the same thing that that quarterbacks do, elite quarterbacks. It's the same way. Like, they really don't, a real grandmaster chess player doesn't need to see the board at that level anymore. I mean, so the blindfold is sort of a gimmick, because they're practically playing blindfolded anyway. They don't really need to look.
Right.
They can hold the whole game in their mind.
Right. That's one of the things they say about the fellow who just won the world championship, Magnus Carlsen, that when he reads books about chess games, he just simply reads the game. He doesn't, he'll just read the moves that were in the game and sees the whole thing going on, and doesn't actually, even have to have a chessboard near him.
It's interesting you use that analogy of reading, because so what they're doing is chunking, right? Is they're learning groups and systems that break down what would otherwise be large groups of chaotic information, so it makes sense. We all do that with things that we're expert at. If I gave you 20 random words right now, you'd have trouble repeating them back to me. But if I said a 20-word sentence to you with the same words, you might be able to repeat it back to me, because you've learned a system of grammar and groups of words and phrases that make sense out of otherwise chaotic information for you.
Yeah, actually, I think that's also true. I tell people, my day job, David, is that I'm a financial advisor. I only get to do the radio gig once a week. And one of the things that I'll say to someone is, can you show me your statement? And they say, Doug, let me explain it to you. And I say, it'll go a lot quicker if you just show it to me. And, literally in a few seconds, I'll look at it, and I know exactly what's going on, and I can figure out a huge amount. In the same way my father, who's a surgeon, used to say, he would say, people would come up and say, hey, Dr. Goldstein, remember me? He'd say, I don't actually remember you, but if you would show me your scar, I'll know the whole story.
Sturgis, yeah, perceptual motor skills, just like hitting a baseball.
We're talking with David Epstein, who wrote a book called The Sports Gene, which hit the New York Times best-selling list. He's a well-known sports writer, and I apologize, David, that maybe I shouldn't bring a sports writer onto a personal finance show, but I really think that based on what you wrote in your book, a lot of what you talk about is very relevant to people handling their money and learning about handling their money. So one of the things I'd like to ask is, do you think that wealth is something that has a genetic component?
Well, I certainly think that people with certain, who are predisposed to certain types of skills, given the nature of our information economy, will tend to gather more wealth. But if you mean sort of managing the wealth that you already have, I still think yes, because people are, do have sort of different talents. But I think anyone can also learn to do what you're talking about, which is what you were talking about in looking at statements is basically honing in on important information and discarding the unimportant information. And that's exactly what elite athletes learn to do when they look at a field, so it doesn't become chaos, right? Someone who's never played soccer or hockey, all they see is chaos, right? Whereas experts learn how to hone in on the important information. I think anyone can learn to do that to a degree, but in every case in sports, some people learn it faster than others, and actually in every skill, every study of skill acquisition that I've seen, that's the case. Some learn faster than others, but everyone can improve.
You keep relating to practicing or trying something or doing something, and it seems to me that on the opposite side of what you're talking about is what another former guest on the Goldstein on Gelt show wrote about, David Shank, in his book, The Genius in All of Us, where he talks about the concept of the 10,000-hour rule, and he gives examples of Tiger Woods and Mozart and people who we think are great, and he points out that these people just really work their bottoms off to become great. What's the connection?
Yeah, well, you certainly have to work like crazy, but the Tiger Woods example is by far the exception, not the norm. So if you actually look at the number of hours of practice that athletes who go on to become elite do in childhood compared to those who go on to become near elite, the elites are actually always practicing less until their mid to late teen years, always less. What they have is, the Tiger Woods is a very rare exception. What they have is what's called a sampling period, where they actually try a bunch of different things, while the eventual near elites are already choosing one thing. They try different things, they find what best fits their talents, and then they home in on that, they focus in on that in their mid-teen years. So it's actually, if you look at the ultimate number of practice hours, yes, the elites have more, but if you look at their developmental path, they actually had less until most of the population was screened out. And the 10,000 hours rule, I mean, you can look at the guy who did the original study, right? And he's now become so upset with how journalists like David Shank have interpreted it that he has a letter on his faculty webpage called The Danger of Delegating Education to Journalists. Because the 10,000 hours rule is total nonsense. And he talks about how it was invented in that letter.
So do you think that maybe these people who are just practicing fewer hours, maybe they just practice more efficiently? I mean, certainly I see that in the workplace. Some people just work less, but they work better. They're able to succeed in the 4-hour work week because they are just so focused.
I think there is some element of that, for sure. But the body of literature for the athletes suggests that that's not necessarily what's going on with the kids when they're 8, 9, 10 years old. And most of their practice is not what would qualify as like deliberate practice. Really what they're doing is they're engaging in this sampling period and finding the thing that actually best fits their talents before they choose. You have a rare case where the first implement that someone grabs is the perfect one, like Tiger Woods. But for most athletes, they should actually try a bunch of different things, figure out what they're best at, and then focus in on that. And that's both in team sports, individual sports. There's just a new study for tennis. That's the pattern that the vast majority of ultimate elites follow.
All right, so let's step away from the ultimate elite people because apart from the Goldstein on Gelt listeners, who I assume are all ultimate elite, let's assume that maybe someone's going to download this interview somewhere else. And let's say you feel you're sort of an average guy, but you want to improve in something. And again, I want to focus on the intellectual pursuit, which I'm going to relate to managing money because although many people feel like it's a sport, I think it takes a lot of thinking. If you just aren't good with money, I'll sit with someone in my office and I'll say, listen, you gotta budget a little better. He says, yeah, Doug, great idea, but money just slips through my finger. I got it from my parents. Is that true, or can I give them some encouragement and say it's not genetic, or let me take a cheek swab and I'll tell you if it's true or not?
Well, look, I would say with most, as a general rule of thumb, right, it's genes for the kind of things we're talking about. genes influence everything and determine very little, right? So they will influence people's proclivities. It's like that old question, do you blame your genes or do you blame your parents? Well, how do you know? It's the same thing, right? And so they might not be as natural to those skills of money management as the next person. But the idea that they can't improve, thinking that, well, that's just my lot, that's almost never the case. So absolutely they can improve. And it's actually problematic to have the mindset that, like, well, this is just who I am. That's what's called a fixed mindset, and that really inhibits your ability to improve in a certain task. And
so would you say that sports players, even in the major league, but only some of them are ultimately excellent, but, regular guys on the team, are they all people who've just worked very, they might have been normal guys and they were not necessarily genetically predisposed, but they just simply worked hard enough to be able to make it to the big leagues?
No, I mean, the average Major League Baseball player, the average player, has visual acuity of 20/12, which means they can see from 20 feet away what I have to stand 12 feet away to see. So they absolutely have to put in many, many hours of practice, but that's actually quite rare. So they have to have a pretty rare level of visual acuity to go with their accumulated practice, even the average guys. So you just don't make it to that level without a certain density of photoreceptors in your eyeball, period.
Mm-hmm. And have you found this, or have you checked this in other places out of sports? For example, surgeons, money managers, lawyers, right? Or people, do they all have something that makes them special?
I mean, I haven't gone. No, my research has been restricted sort of to the sports and games, including chess and pool and things like that realm. So I don't know. Can't speak to that as well.
All right. Well, after you get a few $1 million of research money to study this, and I hope you'll come back and let us know. Listen, David, we're just about out of time. We've been talking to best-selling author David Epstein, wrote a fabulous book called The Sports Gene, and he's actually taken the opposite side to a number of the concepts that we've addressed here on the Goldstein on Gelt show. If you want to hear any of the other interviews, for example, with David Shank, all of our interviews are turned into YouTube, so you can simply go to YouTube and look up Goldstein on Gelt and David Shank, as you will be able to look up Goldstein on Gelt and David Epstein, or simply go to goldsteinongelt.com. David, in the last few seconds, just tell me, how can people follow your work?
Well, they can read the rest of the book, which they can see at thesportsgene.com, or it's available on Amazon. And for all those listeners, I would just say that I don't take the anti-practice or opposite stance. I just also include the decade of research that's been done since the sequencing of the human genome, and I don't act like that hasn't informed us at all, like some writers do.
I hear. All right, David Epstein, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.